It's no secret that throughout Christian history, women have been marginalized. Yet many churches now are waking up to this ancient gospel truth that women belong in the same kind of places as men. They are all God's creation, and they have an ability and a right to inhabit all these spaces. In today's episode, we are not going into the details about why that is true, but instead we're going to talk to the men. We're going to talk to the men about how they can become allies in ministry and uplift the voices of women and encourage women in these spaces so that men are doing their part to make sure that women are in these spaces where they belong and they are able to lead and preach and serve as members of God's kingdom. Today on the show, we have Dr. Rob Dixon, who has spent nearly 3 decades with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship, working to create spaces where both women and men thrive in ministry. He teaches at Fuller Theological Seminary and Fresno Pacific University, and he's the author of the book Together in Ministry, and now the book we'll focus on today, Allies in Ministry, How Men Can Support Women in God's Mission. In this episode, we talk about what male allyship really looks like in the church, and Rob offers us a hopeful and practical vision for how the church can become a place where women's callings are championed. I'm Jake Dilburns, and this is Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast for Christians who love Jesus but are tired of culture war faith. Now, let's get to rebuilding a faith that actually looks like Jesus. Rob Dixon, it is so great to have you on the show. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Yeah, this is a really, I told you before we jumped on that this is a topic I don't think about, but I can see its importance, 100%. It's just not something you think about of how men can support women in these cases, and we'll get into all of that, but I'm glad you're bringing this topic to the table today.
Yeah, thanks. I don't think you're alone in that. I think that's probably true often it's true, I'd say. And so, yeah, I'm trying to, the point of the book is to try to give a roadmap or a pathway for people to follow, men to follow as they want to become advocates or allies for women. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I'm really curious, honestly, just to start out with, what is your why in all of this? Like, what stirred your heart to write this book, to get into this space? You know, you've been in this space for a while, talking about working together in ministry and men and women, all those kind of things. So why are you passionate about that? Why are you passionate about this male allyship and all of that as a focus for yourself?
Yeah. There's a lot of stories I could tell here, Jake, so it's a matter of sifting to pick the right one. I've cared about the topic of women and men working together in ministry for a long time now, since 2014 when I started my doctoral program. I've been thinking a lot about the dynamics of women and men working together, and that's the topic of my first book. But while I was doing some training on that book with groups of leaders, I had this one experience that I'll tell you about that really triggered my thinking on male allyship. So I'm doing a seminar. It's in Chicago. There's a group of leaders in the room from all kinds of different organizations and churches. I'm talking about all the dynamics of women and men working together, and some of them can be difficult for men to receive sometimes. So I'm talking about men sharing power, and I'm talking about men doing our inner work, and I'm talking about men, not sort of marginalizing women and making choices and things to not do that. And there was this one gentleman, a leader in an organization, who at the beginning of the training day was super engaged, like all the things that you would hope for in a listener. Good eye contact, laughing at the right times, taking good notes, engaged with his peers, with me, with others, all those things. And then over the course of the day, he started to become less and less engaged. He found things to do on his phone. He wasn't as talkative. I could see him looking out the window, shake his head maybe from time to time. And so at the end of the training day, we got into groups to process the day, and I made sure I put myself in his group because I wanted to hear what he had experienced, right? And he said something in the debrief that really just sort of caught my attention and got me thinking about this. He said, look, if the goal is to become a church that where women and men share power in the ways we've been talking about over the course of this day, I just don't know where my place is as a guy. And that really struck me when he said that, for a few different reasons. But I think the main thing that really grabbed me was, what is a generative vision I could give a guy like that, who's, I think, good-hearted, wants to be a part of a church that embraces women, that has women and men working together the way God intended it. And yet he just doesn't know his place. He doesn't know how to get there. He doesn't know what his participation could or should look like. And so I started asking myself that question: what's a good word for him? And through a kind of a winding path, I ended up thinking about allyship, and that's the genesis of the book Allies in Ministry, which comes out in the next couple of weeks. So that was kind of the origin story, I guess you'd say, for thinking about male allyship as a topic.
Great, and I wanted to hear the origin story. I think that's really interesting, and I'm glad you listened to that person and started wrestling with those and thinking about that. I mean, again, like I said, like there's just topics we don't necessarily think about, but I too feel that, like, so what can I do here? What's my role? What part do I play? And that's important that you decide to go down this path and figure that out. That's important.
Thanks.
For sure. So, you've done a lot of research. You've listened to countless stories. I know in this process. What are women experiencing in kind of this ministry space? What is that harm, whether like really deliberate or just kind of more subtle, that they're experiencing from male colleagues who maybe aren't realizing it? Like, let's talk about what the women are experiencing that you have found, and then we can talk about the better way forward. So what's gone wrong, basically?
Yeah, appreciate the question. I think maybe one thing to say before, I'll give you some examples, but before I do that, I think it's important for me to say that the experts on this question, the best answers to this question would be from the women who've experienced the marginalization, the pain, the abuse, whatever it is, right? And so anything I know about, any answer I give to this question has been informed by, being and it's an honor. It's an honor to have women entrust me with their stories, or to do some reading and research and things like that. So I guess maybe as guys listen to this recording and want to think about how to become allies, I think it starts with education. It starts with listening, it starts with learning. And I feel like that's been the primary thing for me. So maybe the first thing to say, Jake, is I want to center the women's experience. I think my answer to the question is just informed by, again, these women making choices to share that with me. I mean, sadly, there are lots of examples I could share here, right? I have a colleague and a friend who's done some research on this topic, what marginalizes women, and she's got 3 categories. There's like internal barriers, there's interpersonal barriers, and then there's systemic or social barriers, right? So it could be something as simple is the wrong word, but as painful as being marginalized let's say in a meeting. You're in a meeting as a woman, you're not listened to, maybe you make a contribution that gets ignored, you make a contribution that then gets, and I'll use the term here, mansplained, right? There's a way in which your voice gets diminished and marginalized in the communal context. It could also be true that you're not even in that room to begin with as a woman, because no one's taken the time to open that door for you, or there's a theological impediment that says that you can't be in the room where the decisions are being made. There could be even sort of a theological issues, like I said, or social or cultural issues in the community that keep you from having access there. So I think the question for me is, how can the church develop more men into more effective allies to women who would see those impediments and those barriers and then actively work to overcome them? And that gets to the second thing you mentioned about what's the solution. But anyway, those are a few examples, I suppose, of the challenges that women can face in this process.
Yeah, and I'm glad I knew you were speaking from a place of, I've gathered the stories I've heard from other stuff, but I'm glad you mentioned that. It is important. We are both males here today. We're both guys, but we are kind of talking to guys. We're coming from that place today, and that's, of course, where I want to get into next. But first, can you maybe just define some terms for us? Like, as we explore this, what is male allyship in this ministry context? What does that mean? How is that different from just
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
accept women in leadership kind of thing?
Yeah, I sure can. I love the question, by the way. Or I think there's a particular insight built into your question, Jake, the one that right at the end there, which how is the allyship different from sort of this posture of being someone who accepts women in leadership? And I think that's a pretty crucial distinction. My own journey, I started out from a place of, if you had asked me growing up and then into my college years, even into my early years of ministry, I would have said, oh, yes, women for sure can lead. Absolutely. That's my belief, right? But then through a series of experiences, and I could tell stories if you'd like, but a series of experiences, I found myself going, wait a second, this really, really, really matters. And the effect of those experiences were to take me from a place of belief to conviction. And that's where I draw the distinction, right? To have a belief means, yes, I agree that this is true. To have a conviction means I have a belief that this is true and I'm going to do something to make it so, right? And so I think that journey from belief to conviction was a really important part of my experience. And so I think for allies, and I use the word identity a lot when I'm talking about allyship, I think it's an identity to be embraced. And that's another way of saying you've arrived at a place of conviction where you see yourself, you think of yourself, your self-concept is, I'm here to be an ally to the women around me, right? And so in terms of definition, I mean, there's a lot of lots of words I could use for that one. I'll just simply say I like the term allyship because it encompasses, in my mind, a variety of behaviors, right? Allyship is more of an umbrella term, if that makes sense. And so there's a writer named Karen Catlin, credit where credit's due. She wrote a great book called Better Allies, and she identifies, I think it's 7 different roles that allies play: scholar, confidant, amplifier, sponsor, champion, upstander, and advocate. And those are the roles that I talk about this in my book, but those are the roles that allies can play. And so I sort of like that variety, the diversity of the different roles. And I think part of the task of an ally is to discern which role to play in a particular environment. I could keep going. Let me stop there, though, and let you ask some follow-up if you'd like.
This is good. Yeah. Give us more on what this looks like now. Maybe exploring one of those particular roles of allies or wherever you want to go. Like, what does this look like?
I think a great place to start for guys is the scholar allyship role, which is the learner. So we just talked about that a minute ago, but like choosing to open your eyes and your heart to what's happening around you, to listen, to learn, to see the world as it really is. That's a great place to start. Confidant would be another one that is more like, it's more of a quieter allyship role. In my book, I talk about quieter roles and louder roles. Confidant would be a quieter role, but it's simply saying to a woman that you're working with, how can I support you? What resources do I have that I could use to make your experience in ministry better? It could be just being a listening post. It could be, some sort of resource you want to get, like a book, or it could be access as well. Amplifier, the next one, would be like choosing to post about women on social media, let's say, or to hear a sermon a woman preached and like sharing that with your friends, to be a little bit of an ambassador to raise the voices of women in your circles. Champions and sponsors are pretty similar. They're more like in bigger settings, verbally talking about the contributions of women, making intentional choices, like in sermons, for example. When you go to speak at a church, what stories are you telling? Who are you profiling from the pulpit, right? And are your stories about women as much as they're about guys? And then 2 more, the upstander, these are more the louder end of the continuum, but the louder roles would be like upstander, which is where you see something happening that's not right and you intervene. You make a choice to step in and bring justice to a situation. And then the advocate would be the one that's promoting women, bringing women into the places of power and using your leverage, it's a power term, but using your access, your agency to bring women into spaces that they wouldn't be able to get into ordinarily. So those are, in terms of the 7 roles and some practical kind of suggestions for each one. There you go.
Super, super helpful. That's a range
Right.
We're all gifted a little differently. We're all in
Yep.
different contexts. There's
Yep.
something
Yep.
for everybody there, right? I really appreciate that. If we're talking first steps, would you say that Scholar is just start learning, and listening?
I
Is
think
that
it
a good,
is.
really
Yeah. I think it is
easy
mostly
first step?
because you don't want to be in a position as an ally where you think you know the answer to someone else's problem, right? Where you're prescribing a solution, right? Karen Catlin, again, in her book, Better Allies, she has this, she makes a juxtaposition between an ally and then a knight in shining armor. And her thing is, knights in shining armor come in to save the day and the glory goes to them, right? And she says, no, the work of an ally is this more sustained, longer, maybe more in the shadows kind of work you're doing to relieve the oppression of another person. And so we don't want knights. We want long-term allies who are humble and committed to listening and learning. So yeah, Scholar is a great place to start, I think. But like you said it right, Jake. Different people are wired differently. And I have friends in my life who are like not afraid to stir something up, right? And so for them, the louder end of the allyship continuum is going to be way more of a natural fit. For me personally, I tend to be more on the reserve side. So you'll find me using the confidant tool a lot. And having to sort of push myself to be a little bit more like verbally expressive in like a large meeting kind of thing. So I think there's room on the continuum to kind of come in wherever it fits you, but always starting with the learning is the right way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. Big fan of learning myself. Really like learning. Really cool thing. And in spaces like this, that's just the go-to thing. I also obviously big fan of podcasts like this. We're not women talking about this thing, but there are resources out there to listen, to engage, to learn more. And we're just starting a conversation here, and people can get the ball rolling in other places. So, a little bit more of a selfish question, but I'm a podcast host. I can kind of ask it,
It's your podcast. You ask what you want.
Yeah, exactly. My wife and I are in a finding a new church phase. The church we're coming out of had women in ministry and leadership roles, kind of. But sometimes that little trick you see where they're not technically pastors. There's a minister, they're a leader, but they're not a pastor. Anyway. And we're exploring these new churches, exploring these places, and this is a topic. One reason I had you on here, that it's very important to me. We don't have kids yet, but eventually we're going to have kids, and I want them to see women, preaching and serving God in public, in behind the scenes, all over the place. I want them to see that. That's important to me. So for the people in the pews, I mean, like, I don't know, what can we be looking at in terms of a church that seems to actually legitimately be allies towards women?
Yeah. Great question. I think if you're discerning and trying to decide where to land in terms of a church home, you have to ask yourself the question, just how important is this to me? Right? So like, is this a deal breaker? If women aren't, and fill in the blank for yourself, if women aren't preaching regularly, if they're not, up front every week, I mean, whatever the metric is, then is it a deal breaker? I work with college students as a vocation, and sometimes when they graduate from college and go into the church, I say, well, what's your list of things you're looking for in your next church? And they make a laundry list of like 9 or 10 things. And I'm like, okay, you probably only get like 2 of those, or maybe 3 if you're lucky, right? So that's the challenge, I think, is to discern how critical and crucial this is. When my wife and I were looking for churches, this is some years back, but we realized that it had not been a deal breaker for us. This topic in particular had not been a deal breaker to us for a while. But as we had kids and as we were thinking about this next season, we realized, no, this is. Now, that narrowed the number of churches we could choose from significantly, right? For churches that sadly, there are not enough churches that are really doing this well. And so it narrowed that down considerably. But frankly, that made our church search a little bit easier. There's just fewer options to choose from. So I think that's the first thing is, what are you really looking for? Is it a deal breaker for you? And then the next thing would just be learning, listening, watching, observing. I'm always, when I go to a church, I'm always paying attention to the gender dynamics in the room. Who's up front? How do they talk about the other gender? I have a real strong radar for all that stuff, sometimes too strong. I have to try to turn it off, but it's just really developed for me. So paying attention, listening, watching, learning, asking questions of the pastors. I have a friend who was looking for a church recently. This is important to her. And she went to the new members class. They didn't really talk about it. So she was like, I'm not leaving until a pastor sits down with me right now and I ask all my questions. And she did, right? And that gave her the information she needed to make that decision. So I think, yeah, how important is this to you? And then watching and learning.
Nice. Yeah. I don't like the church search process personally because it's so hard, and
That's right.
I don't, a website doesn't give me all the information.
Yes.
You got to walk in and see it for yourself, but then that can be a time-consuming process. But I want a place to land, right? And this is something that is very important to me, that it has become in recent years.
Love that.
Not growing up, but in my adult years, after some education and things, it's definitely important. So I'm on the lookout for sure.
Well, and I think, just to say one more thing, I think it's important because especially for our daughters, we have one son and 3 daughters, and I realized somewhere when they were really little, like, it's important what they see up front. It models for them something, and you can't see, so if you can't see it, you can't learn it, kind of thing, or it's tougher to learn it. So that just felt like that's when it became a deal breaker to us, was when we realized, no, we want not just our daughters, but our son as well, to see what it looks like to have women really exercising leadership, not just in like a perfunctory way, but like really exercising leadership. So the modeling thing is, I think, pretty important.
I'm a huge advocate of, like, everything we do in church is teaching us something. It is theology in practice, and this is something that is a way that we're talking about what we think about hierarchy, what we think about gender dynamics, all of that. I grew up in a church where, when the female missionary came back to talk about her experience in Africa, she just didn't stand on the stage. She stood on the floor, right? And things like that are communicating something. Yes. She was able to go preach the gospel in Africa.
Don't get me started, Jake. Don't get me started.
On the stage. Anyway,
frustrating.
I know, man. I know. I know. So, one of the things you do talk about in your book here is the Bible. Good thing to talk about. Really like that thing. It's really cool. And you talk about some kind of scriptural grounds for this. So, I'm wondering if you could explore some of that, or what you talked about, this model of mutuality and shared ministry, and how that shows up in Scripture, because this might surprise some people, where we don't think about the Bible as supportive of this kind of thing.
Oh, yeah. I mean, shared ministry was God's idea in the very beginning, right? Genesis 1 talks about the command is given to women and men together to fill the earth and subdue it, to rule over the co-regency idea. And I think that, sin got in the way of that, but that is God's heart. That's God's intent, is that women and men would share leadership, and that there's no restrictions on women based on gender. My big picture point would be that the church has been trying to get back to that ever since sin came into the world, and that believers should be working to make that a reality in their place. And so that's why I wrote that first book. In terms of allyship, I mean, I think there's a lot of it's surprising, I think, that it's a theme in the Bible, especially because the Bible is written in such a patriarchal context. It's not the message. Patriarchy is not the message of the Bible, but it is the context in which the Bible was written. So in terms of examples, I mean, I would just point to Jesus. I mean, the Sunday school answer, right, Jake? Jesus. Jesus is always the example here, right? Right. The whole chapter that talks about Jesus as an ally and gives examples of how he adopts all of those roles we talked about earlier. The Apostle Paul would be another one, I think, that functions as an ally. So does Peter, Joseph, the husband of Mary. But I always like to talk about Boaz, because Boaz goes all the way back. I mean, most scholars will say, like, the book of Ruth was written in the 10th century BCE or something like that, right? That's like old school ally. But Boaz fits the bill. If you think about the book of Ruth, I mean, Ruth is certainly the star of the show there. The book bears her name, and rightly so. But Boaz is no slouch in that narrative. I mean, he does a lot to contribute to the narrative, including 2 examples. I mean, one would be He fulfills the Old Testament law of allowing the widows to glean from his fields, right? And he even coaches Ruth. There's like this great line where he coaches her on how to get, the grain and the water and to be safe as she's doing all of that. So he takes that action. That's the work of an ally. But then he also, of course, fulfills it's the kinsman redeemer statute in the Old Testament as well, which is a choice he makes to basically say, we're now family, right? That's a supreme form of allyship. And we know it's a choice because in the narrative in Ruth, there's someone else that has a claim as well to be the kinsman redeemer, and he chooses not to fulfill it. And so Boaz says yes to that. And so I always like to point to Boaz. I mean, Jesus, yes. Peter, yes. Paul, yes. New Testament for sure. But male allyship goes all the way back to the actions of Boaz there in the book of Ruth. So I think he was an ally before it was cool.
Oh, absolutely. And as of the recording of this, I just preached yesterday on Ruth, fresh in my mind. That book is really fascinating. 4 just glorious chapters, cool story. And yeah, Boaz is a good ally.
Yes.
And
Yes.
yes. And then Naomi and Ruth both are go-getters, luckily. And I noted in that there's a cycle of kindness. When you are kind to one it multiplies and God gets involved. Yeah, cool. God's hesed, his loving kindness, all sorts of great stuff, like I said, fresh in my mind. But that's an excellent example of for us for this topic. So as we begin to wrap up, I would love now to just kind of hear about where people can find your book, some other resources you want to bring up, who you are, Rob. Like, this is the plugs and links section.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. So you can find Allies in Ministry. It's coming out April 21st from InterVarsity Press Academic. That's ivpress.com, and you can search for Allies in Ministry. Really excited about this. We're going to do a launch webinar as well, and some other things that we'll get out there. But if people are interested in my earlier stuff, that we talked a little bit about women and men working together in ministry. My book there is called Together in Ministry. You can find it on the same website. And then one more thing, Jake, just to say, my wife Amy and I 2 years ago published a book called Penny Preaches, and it's about a little girl. It's a picture book for kids. It's about a little girl who decides she wants to become a preacher. And Penny Preaches was our idea, or our way of trying to push this conversation that we're having now on this podcast down so that parents can have it with their kids and be thinking about the next generation and how we want to maybe flip the script around women and men working together. So people can find me on social media as well. I'm on Twitter, or whatever we're calling it these days, Instagram as well. I could put in the show notes. But yeah, primarily the books would be a great place to find me.
Great. Yeah, that's what I need to know. Excellent. Good stuff. IVP was generous. I got to peek at your book early, so I've got to read some of it. Yeah. Really great. Want to recommend people go there. And all the other books you mentioned too. Love the children's book idea. Brilliant idea. It's a conversation that needs to be had at that level. So that's super important, super fun. I bet it was fun to write a book with your wife too. That's a cool thing.
Fun is one word you could use for it. Yes, we had we had a good time doing it, but she's the professional children's book writer, and then I brought the storyline or the theme, and so it was this work of integration that we enjoyed, but it wasn't always easy. Yeah.
Got it. That's okay. That's cool to know. That's very nice. Well, we have one last question for you. Every guest on the show gets the same last question. Kind of take it wherever direction, whatever's on your heart here today, Rob. But here's the question. I'm going to read it exactly as everybody gets it. So, as we close, leave the audience with just one practical action they can do this week to live out their faith fully for Jesus.
Well, we've talked a lot about listening, and I think I'm just going to return to that one, Jake. I just feel like listen to the people around you, be curious, learn stories. I think listening is the gateway to empathy. And so I think the more you can sit down, listen, and learn, I think the better we're all going to be. And if the world needs more good listeners, I think. And so that's my word to your listeners. Be good listeners, world-class listeners.
Amen. And I got to say that listening has been Well, not the easiest practice for me, but it's been something I've been practicing for a long time. And a lot of guests bring something similar to the table too. And I think it's a really good encouragement that we can all practice this week. Be better listeners. That is a superb spiritual discipline to get into for sure. So, Rob Dixon, thank you so much for being on Christianity Without Compromise. Super duper enjoy it. Most definitely. Um, on at the end of the show, I always like to recommend a kind of person to share this episode with. Well, today, find your local male. Find a guy that you know, a person that you know that not saying that there's anything wrong with their current allyship, but can be better, which we all can all be better. This is a conversation starter. Let's have that conversation. Let's think about how men can support women, how we can uplift each other in this space, be together in ministry, to quote another one of your books. That is a great reason to share this episode. Find somebody like that out in the world. So, Rob, thank you so much, and appreciate having you on today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
This episode of Christianity Without Compromise was hosted by me, Jake Dobrins, and produced by Theophany Media, my podcast production company. If this conversation served you, please rate and review the show and share it with a friend and help others find it. You can also subscribe at jakedobrins.substack.com to get email updates with new episodes every Tuesday and my often humorous theological reflections on Fridays. And as always, don't just listen, live it. Live out that Christianity without compromise. Thanks for listening.